and I'm the Safe Sport lead with Sport Nova Scotia. And I'm excited to see so many faces. And if I can't see your face, I can certainly see your name. So thank you so much for joining us for our last education series, or last education, I guess, part of the series for Safe Sport Month. It's been an incredible month. And we'll talk a little bit. I'll take 1 minute at the end just to tell you where we're going and what we've got going on in the future. And in the meantime, just remember to keep your mics off and know that this session is being recorded. It will be put on our Safe Sport ns.ca website later, as well as for Nova Scotia. So if you want to refer to it or to share it, please go there. And again, if you have any questions, I know that Mark has allotted some time for questions at the end. We welcome and encourage them. So please, you can place your questions in the chat box and I'll relay those at the end, and we'll take that up. So without further ado, please let me, I'm so excited to announce Mark Smith, our Director of Sport, who is here with his panel members to discuss and engage us in the Black sport experience. Thank you so much, Mark. I turn it over to you. I'll turn off my mic.
Thanks, Elena. And thanks, Jazz and Shaq, for making yourselves available. I know we had the opportunity to do this at the Hall of Fame back in early September, and the two of you did a great job, and I'm excited about the opportunity for us to continue today. So we're going to jump right into things. And today, Jazz, we're going to start with the first question for you. And what I'd like to know, or I'd like for you to share with us, is why you've made the career choice to become a teacher.
I think to me, school is something that came relatively easy to me, but it was something that I was always searching for representation of my own culture, of my own experience, and that wasn't something that necessarily I came about easily. I grew up in the Valley, and while I had some absolutely incredible educators, I never had an African Canadian teacher. I never had somebody that, was biracial that I was aware of anyway. And that was something that I think I really missed out on. And in terms of seeing people in power positions and seeing people in positions that, you want to see yourself in, representation is so important. And I think that there are just some gaps that need to be filled in terms of who's teaching our kids and what they're teaching our kids about. And that really, affected my choice.
Thank you. Shaq, I want to talk a little bit about your university career as a varsity athlete and a student athlete. And when you look back on your 4 years at Acadia now through that lens of freshman through senior, what are some of the things you might do differently and why?
I actually played 5 years because I stayed the extra year, took the victory lap. But I mean, some of the things that I would do differently was just be more intentional on what I wanted to get out of my university career. It was real easy as a young kid from high school who got recruited to play basketball at Acadia. I was going in there with the intention of sport, and I wasn't really intentional about what my career was going to be after basketball. So I'd say, if I would do anything differently going back and start my career over today, I'd definitely be more intentional on what I wanted to get out of my university experience as a whole outside of a varsity athlete. There's times where I think back where, there would be a business banquet coming up and, Jasmine, as you know, we get these mass emails from the school to say, the alumni gala is coming up or the business banquet's coming up, and I just don't read those emails. I just open them and didn't respond to them. I was just so focused on that student athlete mentality and sport. But then I quickly realized, as I was starting to come to the end of my career, 4th, 5th year, I'm about to graduate with my business degree, and I didn't have any job opportunities lined up. I didn't even know what I wanted to do. So that's when I really reflected on that, I should have been more intentional to say, I'm here, I'm taking my business degree, I'm playing basketball, yes, but what do I want to do after basketball? Because I did feel like there was a time in my life after I graduated that there was a little bit of a lull in my life. Basketball was done. I graduated, I got my degree. I didn't have any job opportunities lined up. I seen a lot of my friends go right into their careers because they did co-op and whatnot. So I wasn't really intentional on what I wanted to get out of it. So if I had to go back, I would go to all the banquets, go to the alumni galas, make the network connections, figure out where I want my career path to go, and then use those 5 years of my career to move me towards that goal versus, when I was done basketball, I was done. Like I didn't go play anywhere else. I didn't have any jobs lined up. So like I said, there was like a lull in my life. So I'd just be more intentional on what I want to get out of the experience.
And let me build on that a little bit, Shaq. And as a Black student athlete, and not recognizing for, some of the opportunities that now in hindsight you could have taken advantage of, are there anything that your coaches could have done differently, or is there a way in which the information to attend those things could have been provided to you differently that may have created more incentive for you to look at it? Or do you just feel you were in a place and in a frame of mind at that point where it didn't matter?
I mean, obviously looking back, there's something that everyone could have did differently. Obviously, we know hindsight is 2020. But I'd say like, being a young Black student athlete, coming from North Preston, and then going to Wolfville at Acadia to play basketball, I already felt out of place. So, my comfort zone was basketball. So even just stepping outside of my comfort zone to go to those conferences and, going to these networking events, I felt uncomfortable. And that's probably why I shied away from those situations more times than not. But at the end of the day, I understand, like, basketball coaches have to win basketball games, and, and that's why I wanted to reflect on this experience a little bit more and share my story a little bit more, because there's always a little bit extra that anyone can do to, make someone's experience more welcoming or make you feel at home. And yeah, for me, it was just, I was uncomfortable to go to those events, just based on where I came from and what I was exposed to. And then, like, looking at myself now, like, I'm very comfortable going to network events. I actually enjoy it. Like, it's something that I enjoy to do, but I've never had to experience that yet in my life. And that responsibility on you as a student athlete, once you go to university, you no longer have your high school basketball coach who's more connected in your life than probably anyone else in your life. It's just more responsibility, more onus on you. And I didn't know how to handle that. That being said, as my career progressed, my coaches did start to, influence me to start going to events, or they helped me like get into the SMILE program where I'm doing, volunteer work, or going to the elementary schools or high schools to talk to the young kids. So that was something that was always in, Acadia's mandate. And I think that helped me. But I just think that I could have been a little bit more intentional in my professional career. The volunteer experience kind of came natural because that's just kind of in Acadia's, DNA. So I think that's what helped me make that jump a little bit more seamlessly.
Okay, thank you. Jazz, I'm going to get back to you. As a biracial female completing your education degree to become a teacher, how has your experiences in sport, or have your experiences in sport, been an asset or a liability in your opinion?
I think probably a mix of both. I think that sport, at the bottom of it, we know it builds character. Whether that stays the same throughout your progression of sport, that's up to you. But I do think that you learn social skills, you learn, emotional skills. You're learning how to work with other people. You're working how to work towards a common goal. You're working with people that maybe you don't necessarily align with in all your beliefs or all of your personality traits, but you're all still there for the same reason. And I think that that's something that's really important to learn, is that you're going to be around people that you don't always agree with, and you're going to work with people that maybe your beliefs don't align, but we're all here for the same reason. So I think that that absolutely was an asset, because I think that, going into education, you've got 2 years or 16 months to really put your head down and get your education done. And I think even in terms of placement, you're going in kind of to an odd situation. You're nervous. You're around a whole bunch of new people, and being able to just jump in and say, this is why I'm here and let's get this done, I think is something that stemmed from sports. On the other hand, I think that part of that is, it's a double-edged sword, because it's when you're in a situation where people don't have the same type of work ethic, or maybe aren't as dedicated or there for the same reasons, it's kind of hard to align with that or keep yourself motivated sometimes. But I think that, sport teaches you to be adaptable. And if anything we've learned in the last year is that you've got to be able to be on your toes and figure things out quickly. So I think it's definitely been a mix of both, for sure.
Okay. Shaq, now that you're talking about pursuing career outside of sport and you're in the working world, what are some of the attributes that as a young Black male that you feel have contributed to you finding success in the working world?
Yeah, I mean, Jasmine touched on a lot of them, but obviously, like, just playing sports, there's a lot of skills that are just, you just transfer naturally in your career. Like, obviously, like time management skills, resiliency, and communication and leadership styles. Like, those are all things that you have to learn in sport in order to win games. So it's kind of like it's forcing you to learn these skills, even though you may not have a natural inclination to learn them. So those skills alone are just natural skills that are easily transferable over to whatever career you're deciding to go into. So I think that's why you see student athletes have such a great success in their professional careers once they get their feet under them. But I guess the biggest takeaway for me, just as a young Black male, that I've gotten out of sport that helps me in my career, is just dealing with wins and losses. Just on a, if you look at sport, obviously it means the world to you when you're playing, but I'm just looking at my experience with sport, and it's like, I win games and I go through that emotional roller coaster on winning games. And then I also go through an emotional roller coaster of losing games. And it's like, just as a man, it just helped me, reflect on myself on how I deal with wins and how I deal with losses, right? The same thing is in your career. If we win a basketball game as a team, it could be the championship, it could be, a playoff game, it could be a regular game. When you win, you regroup, you go into the locker room and you either celebrate or you talk about what you could do better, you watch film, you're even making adjustments after you win. So what that does is teaching you, like, not how to be complacent. You win, you're still making adjustments so you can continue to win. And then on the flip side, when you lose, same thing. You watch film, you make adjustments, you pivot, and you try to learn why you made mistakes or why you failed, and then make adjustments. And Jasmine talked a little bit about that, but that resiliency and that mindset just helps me in my everyday world at work. There's going to be some times I'm at work where I mess up and I fail or I do something wrong. In my previous job, there was a time where, I was in digital marketing. I had to spend my clients' dollars, and I messed up one time. It was a long weekend and I ended up spending like 50 grand over budget. So I didn't know how to deal with that. It was emotional. Like, a part of me was like, I'm going to get fired. I don't know what to do. And then those skills that I learned from sport, allowed me to recollect myself, came up with a solution, proposed a solution to my manager. And by the time I went back to my manager, I already had the solution, and I was super stressed out about it. But by the time I presented the solution, he's just like, thanks for bringing this to my attention. I'm glad you have it figured out. And it was done. So it was like those skills of, like, I could have easily just shut down and didn't know what to do, or I went to my manager, like, I made a mistake. Can you help me figure this mistake out? But that resiliency that I learned through sport and how to deal with the losses helped me, like, in that situation, to, like, dig deeper and figure out a solution. And you're going to be presented with those issues all the time in life. And that's why I think, like, the mentality of how to deal with a win is important, but more importantly, how to deal with a loss and keep that momentum going in your career.
Thank you. Jazz, tell us about the barriers that you feel you've had to overcome to be successful in sport.
I think that ultimately, reflecting now, I mean, you always remember the good times. I had quite a good sport experience. I played with great teams. I had some amazing coaches. But I think that, in terms of race and in terms of maybe understanding the people around you, I think that was a miss sometimes. And playing volleyball, I played in a mainly white space. It wasn't until I played, it would have been Mount St. Vincent, and I was 23, that I had, my first Black coach, or that I played with more than one, Black or Indigenous person of color on my team. I was in my 20s. And I mean, I've been playing volleyball since I was 11. So I think that in terms of representation, it was a miss sometimes, for sure. And I think that that's hard when you see, you go home and your experience and you're dealing with things, or, even in the times right now, like, you wear things a little bit heavier when it affects people that look like your family or that you connect with. And I think that there were times within sport that wasn't missed because I wasn't around people that were experiencing the same things. You know, I can remember pretty clearly being in a meeting one time and they were talking about something about race and only spoke with one of the girls on the team who was Black, and like I wasn't even thought of because I don't look Black. And I mean, like, people assume that that correlates, like the lighter you are, the less offended you are by racist things that happen. So I can remember there's some times for sure that you know, you kind of leave the room and you just feel a little lower and a little defeated. But I think, you know, reflecting, nostalgia is a crazy thing, but I definitely had some incredible teams, some amazing coaches who were fantastic role models. But I think just as anybody, there's some pretty heavy misses sometimes too.
Thank you. Shaq, tell us about the people in your life that you would credit with having the greatest influence on your successes to date.
I mean, without a doubt, it's definitely my parents. You know, I think back to, you know, my involvement with sport. You know, started off playing baseball. It was my first sport that I ever played, and you know, I played baseball right up until I was in grade 11 in high school. And you know, my dad was always there to, you know, to be the back catcher when I needed him, or you know, when I was playing basketball, he'd always be the rebounder that I needed. So definitely my parents. You know, on the flip side of things, you know, I think with my mother, and you know, obviously we weren't like the most financially stable family, but I wanted to play all these sports. You know, as we know, traveling, you know, there's been plenty of times where sports I went to, you know, obviously like provinces like PEI and whatnot, but like, you know, playing for the Canada Games team, you know, traveling to Memphis and to Maine and to the States. And this is an experience that, you know, my parents haven't even had a chance to see themselves, and having to come up with the money to send me to these places. So I think with my mom and the role she played in that, in terms of like, you know, applying for kids sport, and the amount of fundraising that she did was just amazing. Like she always went the extra mile to say, you know, we need to fundraise X dollars to send Shaq on the trip. She would run her own little mini fundraising campaigns to ensure that I had, not only was I able to go on the trip, but I also had spending money when I went on the trip. So I didn't feel left out from all the kids who are from different backgrounds who may be more financially stable than us, and you know, going to the mall and buying shoes and whatnot when we're down in Maine or Memphis or whatever it was. So I just think about, you know, what sport has done for me in terms of, you know, my career and, you know, my progression as just as a man, a young Black man. Huge involvement, and my family, my mom and my dad, they made that possible just by enabling me to play sports. So, you know, if they let those barriers that were holding me back, like financial or support or getting a drive to practice, whatever, if they let those barriers stop me, then I wouldn't have been able to be as involved as I am in sport. So the world, all the gratitude goes to them, and they deserve all the credit for my involvement with sport and my success.
Thank you. Jasmine, if you had a magic wand and you could change anything about the sports system in this province as it exists today, what would you change and why would you change it?
I mean, I think the first thing I would change is opportunity. I think that sport is such an incredible way to mobilize yourself, whether it's, you know, from what Shaq just said in terms of creating a career for yourself, for your aspirations, for your work ethic, for your ability to get into school or for financial help with school. Sport is an incredible thing that can affect your life in so many ways. And I think that there are a lot of areas in this province that don't have the opportunity to sport that others do. I mean, I was fortunate enough to have parents that drove me into the city whenever I needed practice, or to St. X when I had, you know, one-on-one practices or anything like that. And there's a lot of people who aren't in that scenario. I think, you know, we just got out of our mentorship program on the weekend, and we were talking about how many reservations in this province there are athletes with incredible potential that never get any exposure because there aren't coaches that can come in, or there aren't fields to play on, or, you know, you're only exposed to kind of the same sports over and over. You have no idea what potential people have. But I think that if I could change one thing, it would be that, you know, we can limit those barriers so that we can have as many athletes as possible participating in sport. And whether it's, you know, for competitive reasons, just to stay healthy, as, you know, a mental health outlet, as a social outlet, whatever it is, I think that having different exposure to different sports in the province would be would be my choice for sure.
Okay, thanks. Shaq, you're a high school basketball coach now. Tell us why you decided to get into coaching and what's your primary goal working with that age group of young men?
Yeah, so I mean, the main reason why I wanted to get into coaching is kind of, all the things that we're talking about here today on those potential barriers that student athletes may face. Some of the challenges that I face. I coach Auburn High, so that's just the same high school that I played at. So just knowing the gaps that I went through as a student athlete who went to Auburn and went to play university basketball, and some of the gaps that I've identified and challenges along the way that I had to go through, I just wanted to turn around and give back to, the same stomping grounds that I came from to help fill those gaps, to make it easier for the next generation. Why I choose high school? I just think that's a very interesting time in these young men's lives who I'm coaching. They're in so many different phases of their lives. Some of the kids that they grew up with, some of their friends that they grew up with, they're starting to identify different paths. Kids who are being recruited to go to university now, they're having these internal challenges of like, do I hang out with my friends a little bit more, or do I sacrifice and work on my game a little bit more to get to university? So like, there's so many challenges that they're going through that I went through, that I know how taxing it can be on these young men. So I just want to share my experience and my perspectives, and as they're getting ready to go to university, not even just to play sport, just, as they're preparing for university in their lives and their career, I just want to help them transition into the next phase of their life. And I think the high school age is a very important phase in their life to transition either into basketball or outside of basketball after sports. So just knowing what my experience was and how important that phase in my life was for me and the high school coaches that I had and how important they were, I seen the impact. I seen people with a variety of different backgrounds excel because of the mentorship that they have. So I want to just provide that impact on these young men's lives as best as I can.
Wonderful. Jazz, you just touched on this a few moments ago. The both of you are part of the new Black and Indigenous Coach Mentorship Program that kicked off this past weekend in Halifax. I'm going to ask each of you the same question here. Jazz, tell us a little bit about the experience on the weekend and what you hope to learn throughout the process.
I think the experience on the weekend was really profound. We mentioned a few different times how everybody just felt it was a safe space. There was a lot shared, there was a lot discussed. And I mean, it was almost like we were having to stop conversation because really we all could have talked all day about our experience or about the effect sport has had, about our athletes, all of that kind of stuff. So I think that, ultimately it was really exciting. And I think that it's one of the first programs like this is so incredibly amazing to be a part of. I think that for the future, I hope that we'll be able to reach more coaches and more athletes. I hope that, the athletes that are coming through right now will see their coaches as part of this program, and it will be something that they want to be a part of too. And I think even exposure in different areas. I know that right now it's a pretty close-knit group, but just that it will grow and progress even further than it has already.
Thanks. Shaq, how about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, Jasmine touched on it, but this is definitely one of the most interesting and impactful initiatives that I've been a part of. Just looking back the past weekend, and we had presenters, people that come in to present to the group and to spark interesting conversations, and I'm pretty sure every presenter went over time because the conversation that was being sparked was just so valuable and so interesting. And I knew the majority of the folks that were in the room just from being around the community, but I didn't know of what level of detail or the additional insight that what brought them to the table to be a part of this program. So just getting to know a little bit more about everybody's backgrounds and everybody's challenges. I feel like one of the things that happens, within the, especially I think in the Black community is, everyone gets painted with the same brush. They think they know what the issue is because you're Black, right? And that, to me, that this past weekend just perfectly showed like there were so many diverse backgrounds with so many different issues and coaching and different gaps that need to be filled that came up naturally. And, I even found myself like raising my hand and wanting to talk and wanting to contribute. And that just just felt like a safe space. And I'm not typically one to do that. I don't think I ever raised my hand in class in university, but now here I am at this conference or this mentorship program, and I'm just diving in and really chiming in on my insight and stuff like that. So it's very valuable, and it's very interesting to see the different diverse backgrounds. And I just hope to continue to keep the conversation going and continue to get more information out of my mentor in this process.
Great. Jazz, you're someone that I know hopes to coach at the high school level down the road. You've coached at the community club level. Can you share with us some of the barriers that you feel you've faced as a biracial female?
I mean, I think, again, my sport is mainly white in this province. So I think that, you know, when you talk about high school athletes or even that age, you're kind of more than a coach, and you become somebody that kids kind of turn to for advice or experience, or even just questions that maybe they're not comfortable asking their parents, and I mean, that happens when you're younger too. But I think that sometimes there's a level of understanding that maybe people didn't get. And I think that, you know, when we go to different areas, or, you know, I can remember traveling with club teams and not wanting to stop in an area or making comments about other teams or their jerseys or whatever else. And I think that as somebody who kind of is in between two communities, you know, you're aware of why all these things are happening, or the economic reasons, or, you know, the fact that, you know, some areas are a little more rural than others, or marginalization, or, you know, systemic oppression, or all of these other things. So I think that that's something that's kind of always in the back of my mind, that, you know, in some areas that I've coached, it has really been missed. And I think it's hard to explain that sometimes to younger people, especially if they haven't been exposed yet. So, I mean, I think that again, Shaq mentioned earlier, that time period is so important, and kids are making really big decisions about their lives and about, you know, am I going to go to school? Where am I going to get a job? You know, am I going to go right to work? Like, it's a pretty difficult time. And I think that coaches have such a big influence on that time in their lives.
Thank you. Shaq, tell us about North Preston. It's a community that we know has been often unfairly portrayed in the media as not a healthy place to be or a safe place to be, yet you've grown up your entire life there and you've had great success, as have many others. What would you want people in the sporting community to know about your community that may not have been exposed to North Preston?
Yeah, that's that's a loaded question, obviously. I can talk about this question in so many different ways, but I mean, the way I would describe, you know, my community is that, you know, there's no shortage of talent or potential of any kind in the community. The only thing that's missing, I'd say, is just access and resources. You know, I hear we have a lot of success stories from the community, whether it's from, like, you know, business entrepreneurs, both older and younger generations, or, you know, talk about sports. You know, we got successful people in boxing and gymnastics and soccer, volleyball, hockey, baseball. I didn't even mention basketball. Like, that's a fact. But just so much potential, so much talent, just missing the access to, you know, like Jasmine talked about before, there's a lot of barriers that are preventing, you know, everyone from getting involved. So we're just missing the access to, you know, the resources. And, you know, I just think back to, like, there was an example that I noticed. This is not even sport related, but just like of why I just felt like our community is treated unfairly. And this is just a small example that I noticed that happened past in August. And it's not even it's not even a big issue. It's just something that I noticed as a community member that puts into light that we're not treated fairly, or we're either neglected, or the focus is just not on us. So back in August, I think we had like a big rainstorm or a windstorm or something, and there was a stop sign that blew over in the community. This stop sign is like right in the heart of the community, right by a school, and it's like the most pivotal intersection in the community by the school, and there's a stop sign that blew over and it blew away. So there's no stop sign there by the school. So mind you, August is back to school season. You know, kids are starting to come back to school, get ready for back to school. And that stop sign wasn't replaced for like a month. So there was 2 or 3 weeks where school was in, like an elementary school where, you know, grade 4 years old and up, elementary school, and there's no stop sign in the main intersection for the kids. Like it's the main crosswalk where the kids cross the street to go to school, and there was no stop sign there. And that was just a reflection to me, because, you know, I drove past that intersection every day. Everyone from the community knows there's supposed to be a stop sign there. So people were stopping because they're aware of that intersection. But like it took a month to get a stop sign replaced right by the school where the kids are playing and school is back in. So it's like, I seen it, I'm like, they don't care about us. Like, that's just my first thought. Like, they don't care to replace a stop sign, or it's not important. And the community feels that, you know, the kids feel that. That's just a small example, but you feel like they don't care about you. And, you know, as the media picks up these poor stories or these bad stories on, you know, whatever's going on in the community, and we end up getting the headline for the negative stuff, there's also tons of success stories in the community that the media doesn't pick up on. And it feels unfair, and the community feels like they're not valued. You know, one of the things I study Kobe Bryant, because like his mentality, I just like Kobe Bryant's mentality. And I seen an interview from Kobe, and he was talking about a children's book that he made. And the children's book, he was talking about the children's book, and the sleeve of the book was felt or suede. It was like a different kind of material. It just felt smooth. And the reason why he wanted to make the book that way is because he said, like, the children can understand when you put your heart or your value into something, they can feel the difference. So that was his point that he was trying to make, that the kids feel the difference. The kids feel when you care about them. And I go back to that stop sign example of, like, the most important part in the community, I'd say, is the school, where all the young kids are going to school, and we can't even get a stop sign up without a month or 2 to 3 weeks going by to get the stop sign up. It just feels like we don't care. Nobody cares about the community. And I don't want to, like, pinpoint North Preston against other communities, but I'm pretty sure, like, if there's a stop sign that blows over in a school zone in any other community, that's probably going to be replaced pretty quickly, if not the same day. And I like I said, I don't want to pinpoint any other communities, but that's just my feeling as a community member, and seeing that. And I didn't talk about this to anybody. I didn't file no complaints or anything like that. It's just, I was kind of intrigued. It's like, how long are we going to go before we replace the stop sign? And, you know, they did replace it. It was like a temporary one. Now there's a stop sign there, but it just feels like people don't care, and the media puts bad headlines in the paper and all that kind of stuff, despite all of these success stories. So I say, like, you know, if I want anyone to know one thing about North Preston, is like, we have no shortage of potential or talent in the community. We just need resources, and we just need access.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Shaq. Jazz, as a Black female, what advice would you give to young Black female athletes who are preparing to pursue opportunities in provincial level sport or in post-secondary sport?
I think the first thing would be probably that you're not going to see people that look like you, and that's okay. And that you're going to become okay with that, or maybe not okay with it, but you're going to accept it because it doesn't change. And that was kind of hard to accept sometimes, that, you know, going into the gym, there's very few people that look like you, or that have parents that look like yours, or that identify with experiences the same way that you do. And that can be hard. And I think that people downplay how kind of frustrating that can be sometimes. And I think the other thing is that, you know, as a female and being younger, there were lots of times that I heard things said about people of other races, or about Black people, or about other teams from specific areas. And I didn't speak up, and I should have, because you're so worried about being polite and about being liked that you don't want to be the person that's always pointing out when people are being inappropriate, or when people are saying things that are offside. And I think that that's something that I've kind of grown out of a little bit, but be okay with calling people when they say things that are out of pocket, and be okay with telling people, like, you actually can't say that, or, you know, I really would prefer if you worded that a different way. Because there's definitely going to be times that that people are going to say things and that it's going to hurt you, and you're not going to say anything because you don't want to be seen as the one that's always bringing up race issues or the one that's always argumentative. And that's what's kind of difficult sometimes, is that people will assume that you're always pulling the race card or that they can't say anything around you. And I think that people need to be called on that. And the other awkward part is that sometimes it's going to be adults and it's going to be coaches that are the people that are saying that. And it's really hard to be 16, 17 and say, hey, you know, I really didn't feel comfortable about you saying that, or about you describing that person that way, or any of those other things. And it's really unfair of kind of society as a whole to put that on a 16-year-old shoulders. But I think in the long term, you know, you're going to find your voice and you're going to be able to speak up. And, you know, it'll build character for sure, but, you know, be ready to fight about stuff sometimes, and that's okay.
Thank you. Shaq, I want to go back a little bit on your last question. What do people need to know? We've got a lot of people listening to this session now, others that will come to it. If I'm a coach that is intrigued by some of the things you've said and would like to pursue athletes that live in the North Preston community or in the Black community, what do coaches need to know, or people coming into your community need to know about how to best position themselves and to provide the best possible perspective on wanting to work with, coach, or recruit athletes from the Black community?
Yeah, I think what needs to happen is, you know, obviously community consultation. That's always a great way to start. You know, if you have some contacts within the community, try to get some contacts within the community and just let the community help consult you on how to go about things if you're unsure. But I'd say, like, going into the community, just don't go in with these preconceived notions on what you're expecting about this community. And this is kind of something that I've been dealing with, you know, as of recently. Like, there's been a lot of people who reached out to me, you know, in the midst of this, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement and whatnot. And folks want to have conversations with me on, like, Shaq, I'm trying to get more diversity in my organizations. Can you just come on the Zoom and tell your story or share your perspective on diversity? And, you know, the first thing that I make sure I make very clear is that this is Shaq Smith's story. Like, this is what I had to deal with. This is my challenges. These are my barriers, right? So already people want to reach out to me because they know I'm from this community. They know that, you know, I'm heading towards a successful career and I've done some successful things. So they want to have this conversation with me on how did I crack the code type of thing, where they need to understand, like, my perspective is a very, very, very small piece of my life, and it doesn't paint a full reflection of the community and vice versa. And that's why I think a lot of the times, you know, when negative things happen in the community and the media picks up these headlines, you know, I'm not saying that these negative things aren't happening. I'm not saying that these negative things didn't happen. I'm saying that once these negative things do happen, the media is giving them legs, and they're painting the entire community in that picture, whether they know they're doing it or not, versus when we have success stories and then we have to fight to get those success stories in the headline. So it's like, I think we undervalue the power that influence has on people, and especially if folks aren't actually coming into the community to learn about North Preston or learn about the culture or learn how connected we are with our elders and learn how tight-knit we are as a family and learn about the cookouts and stuff that we all do to stay connected. They're not learning and they're not seeing any of that. They're just being influenced what they see in the media. And then now when we have these coaches and these recruiters or whatever coming into the community, they're coming in with the mindset of, like, I know this kid's struggling. I know this kid needs support. And they're not even getting the time to know that kid's story, right? So, you know, if you're going into the community, go into the community looking to get to know that specific kid, because that specific kid is going to have unique challenges, unique goals, unique whatever. He's going to be a completely unique person. My goals and the next kid goal that's being recruited alongside me are going to be completely different. We're not the same person. We come from a lot of the same background. Maybe we had a few of the same challenges, but like I spoke to earlier, my parents were were there for me exactly when I needed them the most. And now the sad reality is not a lot of kids are going to have that support. So I think, you know, going into the community with these preconceived notions or what your mindset is based off of, these influences that are being fed to you outside of the community with the media and whatnot. You got to try to get that out of your head and just get to know the athlete one-on-one, because the last thing we need is like cookie cutter processes to try to reach the community, because everyone from the community is different. So just get to know the kid one-on-one and consultate with the community. If you need to talk to aunts or uncles or cousins or whatever, friends or whatever, just consultate with the community and just get to know the kid one-on-one, and that's a step in the right direction, I think.
Thank you. And Jazz, last question for you. As a biracial female, what advice would you give to coaches or organizations when they're working with people who come from a mixed background, and as you've said, have a foot in both worlds? What would have made you as a biracial athlete feel more accepted and comfortable? And what advice would you give to coaches as they move forward and working with athletes from that background?
I think it's definitely important to note, like the same as what Shaq just said, my perspective is obviously very different than everybody else's. And my perspective is that my perspective. So, I mean, what I needed from coaches may be totally different than what another biracial or another Black athlete may need. And again, that's why it's important to know your athletes. And that's, to me, your job as a coach, to know, maybe Jasmine needs some more of this, or like maybe Jasmine's looking for this, as opposed to somebody else. To me, what would have made a big difference is, I don't know how many speakers we had come in, or dietitians, or personal trainers, or whatever, and there was very, very little variance in what those people looked like. And representation is so important to me. And that's something I probably didn't realize until, I was probably in that university, maybe a little bit after age, that there was nobody who had hair that looked like mine. There was nobody who had parents that looked like mine. There was, you become the person in the room that I can't think of how many times I sat at school and it was, they talk about a Black issue and the entire eyes in the room start to look at you like, how do Black people feel about this, Jasmine? Like I'm here to speak on behalf of an entire race of people. So I think that coaches need to be aware of that, number one, that when you do bring things up, sometimes it does make Black and Indigenous athletes really uncomfortable. And especially in a group of their peers where you just want to be there to play sport. You don't always want to have to be the voice of reason or the voice to speak on behalf of an entire race. The other thing is, if coaches are having people come in and speak about healthy eating or about working out or about the multitude of things that we cover, mental health, whatever, try and bring in professionals or speakers that are from different backgrounds, that are from the LGBTQ community, that are men, that are women, that are people of color, that, there's so many people that are available for that. And to keep providing the same person that looks probably the same way that your coach does, in my sport anyway, can be a little bit damaging sometimes. We even had a conversation on the weekend in our mentorship program about staying in hotels, and you realize, like, why are you doing your hair like that? And why do you need so much time to do this? And why do you have to bring all these hair products? And what's that? Like, those conversations to an impressionable 14 or 15-year-old can be really damaging. So I think maybe as a coach, just be aware that while you just see athletes, these are all really individual people who have individual needs. And to show a little bit of care about, the times right now or about people's background is really important. I think even just to be cognizant of what's going on around in the world. I had tons of conversations with family members or with friends in kind of the range of George Floyd, and not that George Floyd is the only scenario like this that's ever happened, but that things were really frustrating, and you're getting inundated with messages about how do I do this? And I think that you have to be aware that sometimes people are just a little bit down. I can imagine the Indigenous community right now is really feeling that in Nova Scotia and beyond. That be aware of that maybe people their mind isn't totally in it because there's a lot going on behind the scenes. And I think that's, some coaches probably won't take the time to do that, but the coaches that will are the ones that are going to make a difference in your life.
Thank you. Elaine, I think we're going to end it there for questions for the panel. And if people have questions they would like to ask, I'm sure Jazz and Shaq would be happy to answer them.
Yes, please. Again, we'll just wait if anybody wants to unmute and ask a question. I don't see anything in the chat box, but I'll check again. I don't see anything right now, but please feel free to either put a question in the chat box or unmute yourself and ask our panelists or Mark a question. I'll wait a minute. As I said, I don't see anything right now. I'm going to put this out there, Mark, and hope that if anybody does have questions following this, or if this video, when it's posted, is shared, then they can come to you and you can farm out the questions as needed. I know I personally could listen to this, and you guys, I have heard one presentation, and Mark, if you don't mind just relaying the information that you know about the other presentation. And before you do that, thank you so much, Mark and Shaq and Jasmine, for this incredible discussion. As I said, I know personally I could listen to you for a lot longer. And thank you everybody, and Mark, I'll leave it with you in a second, but thank you everybody for joining us for the first ever Safe Sport Month. We've had 4 weeks of presentations. We have a video that launched on October 1st. If you if you haven't seen it, please do. Almost 7,000 views it's been seen by, at least on Facebook, and then probably more elsewhere. We have new resources, safesportns.ca. These videos will be up there. I just see that Tasia has a question. Tasia, if you want to put or unmute yourself, if that's okay with our panelists. Tasia, go ahead.
Yeah, well, first, I apologize for joining late. I was in another meeting, so I know I jumped on halfway through, so hopefully I can get a hold of the recording. My question for each of you would be, how do you have conversations around clarifying that not all Black people are from the same community? I know personally I've had some challenges knowing that I grew up in Timberley, which is a predominantly white community. And I think a lot of times around discussing Black Lives Matter, there's this thought that all Black people are from the same 3 or 4 predominantly Black communities in Nova Scotia, and that's the only place that we exist. So I'm just curious how we have those conversations where we are recognizing that we do have Black athletes, Black and Indigenous athletes scattered around the province where they really could be playing on sports teams that are truly predominantly white. I know that was certainly my experience by around the age of 12. So I'm just curious how we have those conversations.
You want to go first, Jazz?
Okay, yeah, sure. To me, I think that that's always been tough. I grew up in a rural area. I grew up in a mainly white area. Of my graduating class in grade 12, I was one of 2 Black people that graduated. So I've spent the majority of my life around white people. And I think that sometimes you don't realize when you're young, you just don't want to be different. So I can see how probably if some people had reached out or said something when I was in that kind of teen age, I probably would have pushed back of like, no, I'm the same as everyone else and I'm just here to play volleyball and I just want to be with my friends. And because you don't want to be outlined as different. But reflecting now and looking back, I know that probably would have still meant something to me though. I think, even in speaking on the Black experience, like I myself have to take a bit of a backseat to this because I didn't grow up in a tight knit Black community. I am somebody that easily passes as white. I am someone who is more often privy to other people saying racist things as opposed to racist things being said to me. So I think that it's just a conversation. It's just an open door to say, hey, if this is, you're from X community or whatever, or if I guess that's a hard question, actually. Like it's difficult to know because you have to know your athlete. If somebody's really forthcoming with information, they're probably going to have this conversation a lot easier with you. I know as a teen, kind of being like sat down in school and, you were kind of taken in by whoever like the Black support worker was, like I was mortified. Like I hated going because I didn't want to be pulled out of like what all my friends were doing and whatever class to be like, hey, Jasmine, how are you? Like, I'm fine. So I think it's just knowing it's knowing your athletes. And I think that the athletes that are ready to have that conversation probably will bring it up to you as well.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that, Jazz. So I 100% agree. I think it's just important to have the conversations. You know, and Jazz, you kind of spoke to it earlier, but like you just have to be, as the athlete, you have to be willing to say, you know, these are my challenges. This is Shaq's story. This is where I'm from, and this is my version of the Black experience, right? So like even for me, like growing up, you know, like I said, I played baseball. Baseball was my first sport at an early age. So I'm traveling to Glace Bay and Miramichi and all these different places with a predominantly white baseball team. And, you know, again, I'm getting those experiences with my friends that say, oh, Shaq's from North Preston, and they're making these assumptions that, you know, I like certain music, or I like this and I like that. And it's like, it was up to me to say, no, I actually like this, or I like that. So this is my version of the Black experience. So there's never going to be a person who can speak on the entire Black experience and boil it down to one sentence or one solution. I think the steps are getting to know as many different versions of the Black experience as you possibly can, because now you're understanding where people's paths come from, where like you understand like why Shaq wanted to play baseball versus basketball, and you know a lot of, I still to this day I have a lot of friends that I met through baseball who are white, and they're still some of the best friends that I've had. And there's been some rocky situations because they had these assumptions of me that I had to push back on, and it was uncomfortable for a second, but if they're really your friends and they really love you, and you guys are gonna get over it, and you're gonna use it as a learning experience. So you know, I think it's important to have conversations like this to kind of coach or mentor the younger athletes to say, step up and let your Black experience story be told. But also at the same time, I think coaches who are experienced or have exposure to these Black athletes need to understand, like, I got to get to know Jasmine, or I got to get to know Shaq, and I got to get to know who they are, and don't just assume that, you know, just because Tasia, you're from Timberley, that you didn't have your own Black experience. Like, you had your own Black experience. It's just your Black experience is different from Shaq's Black experience and different from Jazz's Black experience. And no one's going to know that unless you have that conversation with them.
And if I can jump in here too, Tasia, just to take it to a bit of a different level, I think that it's organizations that have the responsibility to demonstrate more of a diverse and inclusive approach. I think it's one thing to suggest that coaches have an obligation, and we do, to make sure that we understand our athletes and understand the environment and create a safe space. But I would suggest to you that it's an organization's responsibility to have policies that are inclusive of that, and that ensure that when somebody is recruited to be a coach, that they do get some level of diversity and inclusion training. I think the Safe Sport Initiative and having Alana on our staff is a huge step in the right direction. But I would argue that we need somebody in this province that represents diversity and inclusion. How is that any less important than Safe Sport? How is that not an absolute component of Safe Sport? Because we know that one of the reasons that we had 21 coaches in a room from the Black and Indigenous community this weekend is because they don't feel safe when they go to mainstream sport NCCP programs, because no one looks like them. Nobody looks to cater to them. Nobody looks to make it a safe space for them to be. But yet we'll ask at points in time, well, why don't we have more Black coaches that want to coach X sport, or more Black coaches that want to coach this sport? Or why don't we have more Indigenous people from the Indigenous community wanting to be part of it? When we know why. It's because we don't create a welcoming and an inclusive enough environment for them to want to be there. So, you know, to their points, it is about organizations taking a stand and saying, this is who we are, and this is what we represent, and these are the types of values that we encourage. And people who are going to volunteer and be part of our organization are going to either have these values, or they're not going to be part of our organization. So coaches certainly have a role to play, but organizations, they set the tone for what's expected in terms of every volunteer that participates. And I think that's where the buck lies.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tasia, for asking the question, and thank you to Mark and the panelists for answering it so thoughtfully. Are there any other questions we have for Mark or Shaq or Jasmine before, and you can put it in the chat box or unmute your mic before we sign off? I don't see anything right now. Again, feel free to reach out to myself or to Mark, and he can distribute the questions if there are follow-up questions. And again, I want to thank you so much. Mark, if you just want to have the last word and talk about the other discussion that will be presented, if you can. And again, I thank you so much for joining us for Safe Sport Month. I'll turn it over to Mark for the final words. And again, thank you very much. Thank you, Shaq and Jasmine, as well.
Thanks, Elena. I'd like to start by thanking Shaq and Jazz. This is the second panel discussion that we've done in the last month and a half, and you've both given us your time, and you've been wonderful to talk to, and you've given us lots to think about, so thank you for that. On November the 15th on Eastlink, on their documentaries channel, they are going to air both the first panel presentation, so what we would call part one of the Black Sport Experience, as well as a one-on-one that I did with Bruce Rainey called Black Coach. And they will be aired November the 15th at 9 p.m., I think back-to-back 2 half-an-hour segments on Eastlink. And then the other thing I'll offer is that next Thursday, as part of the Sport Leadership Conference, which is delivered by the Coaching Association of Canada, I will do a presentation called Black Coach that will speak to my experiences as a coach and as an administrator in the sports system, both in this province as well as nationally. So for anybody that might have an interest in discussion or conversation around that, that would be a good thing to tune into. But thank you to those who have taken the time to be here today. We're all busy people, but we live in the sports sector. We work in the sports sector. We have a responsibility to make the sports sector everything it can and should be. And it's only through the leadership of people who lead our organizations in this province that differences can be made. So thank you all for taking the time to come today.
Thank you again. And that concludes our fourth and final presentation during Safe Sport Month. Be well and be safe. Thank you.